Office of the Ombudsman for Banking Services says it's been inundated with complaints from people who fall behind with their vehicle repayments and have their cars repossessed by banks. Ombudsman Rihanna Steyn says that the first legal principle for customers to understand is that under vehicle financing agreements, the vehicle remains the property of the bank until the loan is fully repaid. The Office of the Ombudsman for Banking Services says it's been inundated with complaints from people who fall behind with their vehicle repayments and have their cars repossessed by banks. Ombudsman Rihanna Steyn says that the first legal principle for customers to understand is that under vehicle financing agreements, the vehicle remains the property of the bank until the loan is fully repaid. She joins us now to clarify the nuances of vehicle finance. Thank you so much, Ombudsman Steyn, for joining us on Newsnight this evening. So can you first just give us some context on the increase in repossessions and what kind of figures we're looking at compared to last year, for instance? Good evening. So I think the reason why we put out the press release is really to educate consumers, because we've seen approximately an 18% increase in the vehicle repossession complaints in our office. Now that in our numbers, we deal with about 8,000 complaints per year. That's significant. But I think more alarming is the number of calls. Our call center reports that they are receiving numerous calls on a daily basis from consumers talking about prescription matters, asking what's happening and how does that work. And then many of those matters where they think the claim is prescribed also then relates to a vehicle finance, where they have not been paid and they also haven't received any summonses. So they think the claim of the bank is prescribed and they're asking us for more information and advice, or they want to log a complaint. So definitely an increase in the repossession complaints that we've seen. And we think that it is necessary for consumers to understand what their rights and obligations are.
Just perhaps in very sort of simple layman's terms, explain to us what that term prescribed debt actually means.
So it's not always easy to put it in a very short sentence, but I think in basic for consumers to understand, if a period of 3 years elapses and in our case, the banks have not contacted you and you have not acknowledged the debt and you haven't paid the debt, then you can say that the claim of the bank has prescribed. They cannot legally pursue the claim. So then you talk about in layman's terms, the debt is prescribed, the claim is prescribed.
And sorry, just to jump in there, that's only the debt that has then lapsed or prescribed. That's not to do with ownership then of the vehicle, which is where the question for consumers comes in, correct?
Most definitely. So obviously, if you just talk about a money debt, then the debt is gone and there's nothing else to do, and the bank cannot then take legal action. But now in this matter, there's a vehicle, and the vehicle remains the property, the legal property of the bank. So even if they cannot claim the debt on the vehicle finance agreement, that property remains theirs, and they can come and get that vehicle back from you. They of course have to follow a legal process. They cannot just arrive at your house or send somebody to come and take the vehicle back. They have to follow the court process, but the vehicle remains their property, and that is what I think so many consumers unfortunately do not understand.
Okay. Perhaps you can give us some clarity on exactly what those legal processes are that the bank has to follow and what consumers' rights are in that same vein.
Yeah, so I think let's start just with a comment that, we always encourage consumers to pay their debts. It is futile to try and avoid the bank, the calls and the emails and approaches from the bank if you have this vehicle in your possession and you owe the debt. Because what is happening is that the debt is just keeping on getting bigger every month with more interest as long as you're not paying. And the value of the vehicle, of course, gets smaller and lower. So by the time the vehicle is eventually repossessed, and it will happen, and they sell the vehicle, then you are still going to be liable for that outstanding debt. And by now it is a much bigger debt with a much lower value for the vehicle. So it's definitely better to repay, or if you cannot repay, to take action. So one of the things you can do as a consumer, you can voluntarily surrender the vehicle. So this is a right in terms of the National Credit Act to assist a consumer to get out of the agreement, which they can no longer afford. So it's for the consumer to contact the bank and say, I cannot afford this vehicle. Let's rather sell it now and pay off the debt with the funds of the sale. And if there's a small shortfall, then the consumer remains liable for that shortfall. And of course, if the vehicle sells for more than the debt, they will be entitled to that money. That is their right in terms of the Act. That doesn't mean that somebody can arrive at your house and force you to sign a document which says that you are voluntarily surrendering the vehicle. This is really meant for a consumer contacting the bank on their behalf, or that they want to do it. So be very careful for somebody who just arrives and forces you or tries to force you to sign documents. You do not have to do that. So that's something important. And then the bank has to follow a legal process by sending a letter of demand, which is called a 129, Section 129 letter, warning the consumer that these are the consequences. They will list the consumer on the credit bureaus. They will take legal action, which is a summons that will be served, and then a judgment. And then eventually the vehicle will also be then, sort of declared executable, and a sheriff of the court will come and remove the vehicle. So those are the two, actions that can take place. Either the consumer can surrender the vehicle if they can't pay, or the bank will, if there's just no action, no negotiation, no scheduling of the payments, they will have to take action and to protect their interests and take legal action.
Now, some consumers think that if the bank can't contact them, for instance, if they purposefully obfuscate or hide their current contact details, that there's no way that that vehicle can be repossessed. But that's just dodging a bullet that is eventually going to come, isn't it?
Sometimes when Western countries go to war with developing countries, they don't always necessarily use weapons. They always have to get creative with their strategy when it comes to how they apply their war, especially a country like South Africa. So they need to apply the strategy of war with tender loving care. Although I have talked about this before, but I'm going to reinforce it in case maybe you did not get the message before. Fanzil explained how banks had been charging black bondholders significantly higher interest rates on mortgages and motor vehicle loans compared to their white counterparts, amounting to up to 40% more in some cases. His investigations unveiled deeply troubling patterns of discrimination dating back to the late 1980s. He exposed how Sambu's bank's collapse in 2002 triggered Standard Bank's discriminatory practices against black home buyers, leaving them overcharged by up to 100%. Thousands of black homeowners inherited Sambu's bank's excessive fees when First National Bank took over its bond book, with average overcharges of 60,000 on 60,000 bonds. In simple financial terms, banks racially profile people in this country. They charge black people higher interest compared to white people. For the car that you buy for $500,000, you're going to pay it back R1 million. Remember, systemically, the system does not want to include black people in opulence. It's something that white people should experience only. So they're trying to eliminate as much black people trying to involve themselves in secular spaces that they are not supposed to be. So your cars, your homes, the clothes that you put on your back, every single thing that you pay on credit, you're gonna pay triple times more than a white person, basically. If you take a loan, you're gonna pay that money double. And in fact, if you ask for them to save that money for you, they're gonna save scraps. And you'll be surprised 30 years later, you wanna go to the bank and get that money for your child. Maybe invested in education. You find that maybe they saved like 20,000 Rand. How does that make sense? You could have just saved it yourself, basically. So you see, wars are not always physical. Sometimes they get creative, like load shedding. Sometimes they tell us that there's no water. They just have to get creative. Or sometimes they have to invent something like COVID, and you'll be so quick to inject it inside your body. But besides the point, you should have discipline when it comes to your money. This is what I do, because I know this, that banks do this to Black people. They don't want us to have money, and they don't want us to know about money and how money works in this country. Basically, they create a system where Black people find themselves in poverty. Then they blame Black people for being in poverty and say, oh, you want things for free, you want things for that. You've been enjoying things for free since you arrived here. You have your maids, your garden boy, you have people working under you, you're uneducated, and you have to earn low, and you get the lowest interest rates when you do things. You've been living in comfortable. You can just take a day off from work simply because your dog died, something that Black people cannot do because they have to systemically keep on working. You go on auctions right now, currently in this country, Black homeowners, their homes are being auctioned, and it's sad, it's pathetic to see actually. And people in the business world are just gonna buy these homes. Mostly white people are gonna buy them, Indians. They're gonna sell it to white people on a lower cost in comparison to you when you paid 10 times more for that house. They're gonna give it for scraps to a white person. Because I'm mentioning Indians is because Indians also like to buy homes on auctions. I saw this from my mother's friends basically. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Keep on being smart, keep on being educated, because wars are not always physical. My father had an educational saving plan from Old Mutual. He did it for me, by the way. By the time that I was ready to go to university, they gave my mom somewhere between 25 to 30,000 rand. That was not enough to cover my whole expenses. So my mom had to go into other saving plans that she did for me in terms of my education. And that was not enough. Again. So all this time, my parents investing in education for me, that I become secure so that I don't end up in debts because I want to pay my fees, ended up in vain, because eventually I ended up paying my own fees, because later on I ended up owing my school fees about 30,000 rand. Saying 30,000 rand because I'm still paying that money namanje. But the fees also decreased, so I'm working and I'm paying my fees, by the way. I'm gonna tell you something else. The banks don't just do this to us individuals, they also do it to countries. This is why we as South Africans, we end up with debts that we cannot pay. And even when we eventually pay those debts, we end up in new ones. You can take apartheid for example. When white people bankrupted the country, because that's something that's not talked about, we used the money that was supposed to use in advancing Black people in their communities. So basically, when we started this democracy, we started with nothing in curing new debts from Western countries, further digging us a further grave for us to collapse. Because let's be honest, we've been collapsing. It's been a pending thing that's about to happen, and things are just about to get bad. They're not bad, they're gonna get bad, especially for those who end up taking loans from banks, taking things on credit from banks, because they make you believe that just because you can afford it, you should take their money. And I'll use my late sister with an example that I want to show you with, that's in conjunction with what you're talking about. My sister was a business-minded person, just like my mother, and she had her business, and then eventually she got sick. She could not afford to pay her car anymore, so the bank wanted her car and most of her properties, right? My mom was like, hell no, you're not taking my daughter's stuff. Hell no. All I can tell you is this, because I feel comfortable with it, because the fact is that my sister passed away. When she passed away, we made sure that they don't get a dime from her. The car that they ended up stalking us for months And yes, like we just find a random car like this coming to our place, just park there to see that if we have the car or not. And this went on for years. I guess this is why also I'm steady when it comes to taking loans from the bank, because they can literally harass your life. So when my sister died, we closed that chapter with her. Everything that she ever owned, we closed it with her. They can't find the car because the car just disappeared as soon as she passed away. As soon as same as her properties as well. So I'm sure they're still looking for it anyway. Maybe they're still watching us from afar. Who knows? Because me now, I don't even know where they are. So truth of the matter is that they are also quick. If you miss a payment, they're gonna pick up those bills. They're gonna rise them up so high that you're gonna find it incapable to pay them. I mean, also looking back at my sister, there were times we were like, okay, we were supposed to be done with this car or this property by now, and then eventually they're like, no, you're not done, you're gonna be done in maybe 3 years or 5 years. Like every year, like it goes up in years and it never ends. So they keep on trapping us in this cycle of poverty where we never really own anything and we are on their mercy basically. So basically, if everything is in the hands of the bank, then you own nothing. The cars, the property, the clothes, you know, nothing you own. It's yours. The furnitures, like it's yours. They can just come in and take everything, that everything you've ever worked for and the money that you've paid for was in vain. They can just take it. And we as a family, we were like, okay, no no. And then this is why also I'm very wise with my money. I'm very, very wise with my money when it comes to banks, because even when they offer me loans, I'm like, why are you offering me loans for don't right? Banks will look for means to put us individuals in debts, put our countries in debts, where we are in this cycle of poverty, in this cycle of debt, in this cycle of never-ending cycle, because they literally own us that way. You can't talk about this situation also because you don't want to lose your job, the only thing that secures you into paying these debts in the first place. So you don't also want to upset the wrong people, like the people that you work for. So your own opinion, you become a slave to your own body, your own voice. You don't even have a voice. Basically, you're technically a slave to this country. You just have to obey the rules of this country. You have no choice. You have to just follow in, because if you don't do that, then shem, you're gonna end up poor. This is why people go crazy. This is why we see people living on the road. They are so crazy. Abantu bethu especially, they're so crazy because of this system is literally jacking up our minds. And there are other instances, we don't even get jobs. Your guys is so effed up. Living in South Africa as a black person is another thing, is a messed up game. What black people fail to realize, especially in this democracy, is that we are still at war with the very same people. It's just that they changed the strategy, that's all. When it comes to this game, we literally just have to be wise in order to gain liberation, not just for our finances, but for our mental state as well. Because if you're not careful, this whole thing will take your sanity with it. You'd find as a black South African, it seems like everything is built to go against you. Sometimes you just can't explain this sadness, this depression, this spirit that hovers around black people, and how we also deal with these things. But one thing is certain about me when it comes to my money, I'm gonna bury myself. I don't have investment policies, I don't have funeral covers, I don't have any of that. When I get paid, my money is divided into sections. There's a certain money I spend and utilize on myself, my expenses for the month, and the other section I'm gonna divide it according to the needs, as though I'm giving it to a investment policy and stuff. And honestly, it's just me dividing my money into sections. I would rather get creative in utilizing the bank to give me money. On top of all the money they've been taking from black people, all the billions that they've been stealing, because what they're doing is theft. Stealing. People want to go and say this country does not have money. How? With all of the billions that goes out of this country and some of the things that we don't look into. So I would rather invest into compound investment, look really into things that's gonna give me money. I know that it won't be that much, but it won't be as bad as taking a mutual education plan, or maybe going to any other company for them to invest my money on my behalf, only for them to just give me scraps like they did to my parents. So they lie to us.